Welcome to And Also,
And
Season 2, Episode 12,
we've made the dozen.
where Kirk and I talk about baked goods. Just got me thinking about that when you said dozen. So
I like that. That's where your mind
that's exactly where my mind went. No, we're not going to talk about baked goods, although that sounds like a good idea. We are going to talk about in this session, talk about the tabernacle found in Exodus 25 through 29. And then some. It goes on a little bit to talk about some of the craftsmanship and so on. But we're kind of in this little kind of two sermon couplet where I'm talking about the tabernacle, and there's so much to talk about that we're taking kind of our midweek podcast to talk about the tabernacle more. So, Kirk, with that said, what do you think about what do you think about the tabernacle?
So it's a fascinating moment, I think, because this is a structure for the people. It's the first real structure mentioned.
Right.
So before now, we were going through the plagues. We were escaping with everybody's jewelry that they were happy to give us, which I think is just, that's amazing. Running through the Red Sea, tra la la, and then get to the other side, and now we're hungry. And
Right.
yeah, right, manna. And then amazing. And we forgot all that other stuff. Right? So all this time, how long, how many hundreds of years, generations this took? All this time, God's been coming up with a way to be able to dwell with people again.
Pre-tabernacle. You mean pre-tabernacle?
So pre-tabernacle, the last time he was hanging out with anybody was Adam and Eve
In the tabernacle like
in
fashion.
the garden, right?
Right.
He's dwelling.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Actually, not to stop you, but I think you just hit something super important because when you were saying that sentence, I went to Jacob. I went to Abraham in my mind. Like, well, that's when God was with them, the covenant. Jacob wrestles with God. However, you're right, and they God didn't dwell with Abram at that point, or Jacob. It was an event. The covenant, it was an event of wrestling with God, but it wasn't a dwelling. And you're right. The last time, and I'll let you pick it up because I think you just hit on something so important. The last time God dwelled with humanity on any level was in the garden.
Because they were without sin.
Right. Okay. So that's
Until this point, the without sin moment, right? I'm sure they're still doing everything they're doing,
right.
bumbling around, being humans, right? But happy and carefree
Yeah.
Until awareness, right?
Right.
And then oops, and then who told you you're naked, right?
Yeah.
That whole bit. So until that point, until they're kicked out of the garden, human beings were dwelling sinless with God. That's amazing to imagine at our point in history.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, just to give some imagery to it, to that point of dwelling, this happens after sin enters, but it's the scripture says that God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And to me that's always, even though it happens after when Adam and Eve are hiding, still that image of God just walking in the garden in the cool of the day is such a neat image of God dwelling, like wanting to dwell with his people.
God didn't want to hang out with sweaty Adam. He's
waiting for the cool of the day. He's just strolling in the garden in the cool of the day. It's just exactly. Such a great image to me. Yeah. So anyway.
So that idea to me, the fact that he misses that and has wanted to get back to this for so long, but knowing that he's set apart and the only way to make the connection involves so much. And even that base connection, right? Even to come close. So you have an entire nation of tribes of people gathered around, and as you pointed out, the tabernacle is to be built in the center of the group, right?
Yeah.
So in the center of all of these people with whom you had covenanted with their ancestor,
Mm.
um, that's amazing to finally get the chance. I've called you out from,
Mm.
I let you grow into a great nation in Egypt, and I've pulled you out
Mm.
from under slavery, oops, sorry about that. And then here we are out in the desert. So, look, it worked out all right. But the wilderness, right? So it's not necessarily desert.
Right.
It's wilderness.
It is without civilization. But it is wilderness. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not wandering through cities.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, there are people out there,
Right.
but they're not big cities and so
Yeah.
on. So they've made their way. They've gotten out there, and God says, "Hey, cool. Let's. I want to hang out with you guys, but in order to do that, here's what has to happen."
Mm.
And the amount of stuff to have one person per year
Right.
come close.
Yeah.
The amount of stuff that you have to do to get to that point is sad, because that shows just how much corruption had gotten into us, that it takes so much to even come close.
Yeah.
The hanging out with isn't happening.
Right. That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
That still can't happen. It's there's an awe, and there's reverence, and there is ceremony.
And there's reconciliation.
There's reconciliation.
But not a. You can be.
It's the symbolism of reconciliation.
Right. Yeah. Because you're not like, I guess.
Because you don't sacrifice a bull and now God's hanging out with you.
Right.
You sacrifice a bull and you say, "I'm so sorry."
Right.
And then you sin again.
And you have atonement. You have that.
Yeah.
In that point, you have, when the sacrifice is made, you have atonement. But then it starts to cycle all over again. That's which creates the problem.
The atonement. I think the atonement is a symbol for us.
Yeah.
To recognize the cost.
Right. Yes.
Of what it has done. Right. So surely you won't die. Something has to.
Somebody does.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's awful. So to think that we went from how this all starts, dwelling, to making a portable dwelling.
Yeah.
And the requirements around what it means, like all the pieces and what they represent, how close anyone's allowed to get to it.
Yeah.
It's the same ground. Everyone's walking on the same ground, but that ground's now set apart.
Mm.
There are sacrifices required at an altar. There's a place to wash yourself. The other part I find really fascinating too is the description of all the materials required to make the tabernacle itself are highly flammable, and there's a pillar of fire and a bunch of candlesticks
that never go out.
Right? It's got to be stuffy in there. I can't imagine how stuffy it had to have been in there.
That's so funny. Yeah, you're right.
Which, thank goodness, they moved it from time to time, because gotta air
God's
that out.
like, it's getting pretty rank in there.
Well, I don't know about rank, right? But at least it's got to be hot.
Yeah.
Or just the air isn't moving, right? But
that's true.
It's really something. But the detail about how dense some of that material has to be.
Yeah. And it's layered, right? It's
layers,
not,
specific layers,
right?
Spelled out about what the wall between us is.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Huh?
Because I look at it from a perspective of when I was a younger man, I worked at a photo lab. Right after the end of the Ice Age, as I've explained to my children, we went to school riding on mammoths. And followed immediately by photography, right? So then
with 35 millimeter film,
35 millimeter film, which blows their mind. What is the stuff that you're talking about? Why can't you do that with your phone? So when there was 35 millimeter film, there were other films before
Right.
that. But, to develop that film, you have to have a room devoid of light, right? You have to have a space that nothing else gets in. And,
It's good. It's a good illustration.
right? So
Yeah.
that's kind of what this is. Uh, is it completely impermeable? No, but is anything getting in there? Not in a hurry, right? Probably
Right.
no flies. Probably
Yeah.
nothing else. Nothing's getting in easily.
Yeah.
So there's this shielding, a flexible shield, right? It's fabric. It's
Right.
and skins, and it's soft-ish. It can move, but it's dense, and
Yeah.
it's not letting things in.
And it does. And its point is to not. Yeah. Right. Its point is to keep things from getting in easily.
Yeah,
You know.
and the other part that's kind of fascinating, you look at other cultures and their temples, and an accessible God that's made into a statue, right? You can see it, you could touch it. Most likely, they are touching it and dressing it up on occasions, right, for holidays
Yeah.
and so on. Here, no.
No images.
You've
No.
gone you've
Yeah.
gone from Egypt where there are temples and carved
Yeah, that's right.
images everywhere to no, there is none.
Huh.
And as a matter of fact, you can't go in and touch them. Forbidden.
So how do you write? That actually brings up a really good, interesting thought, I should say. Okay, so Egypt's gods, even going into New Testament, you have Greek gods, all highly accessible, like you said. Even Paul on Mars Hill, when he's like,
Yeah.
I look, I'm a tourist in your town, and I
Gods for
see
everything.
all these gods for everything, and then I even see one to an unknown god. Like gods are very accessible. And in the tabernacle, God is not accessible. Okay, so that those are the two distinctions. I think that's really helpful. How is it then that don't you think, or how do you reconcile? Don't you think that if God wanted to dwell with his people, that he would make himself accessible, but he chose not to do that? Why not? So how do you reconcile God wanting to dwell with his people, but making it inconvenient that going through, I mean, there's chapter after chapter of how to construct and you're right, it's very detailed, and then he gets into who gets to do it, and it's not just any Joe Schmo. It's got to be specific people who God has given the spirit of craftsmanship to be able to. It's very hard, but yet God desires to dwell with his people. How do you reconcile the hard nature of the inconvenience of entering into God's presence with God wanting to dwell with his people?
To be in the presence of and to dwell with are different, right? So you and I are in the presence of Boston, right?
True. Yeah.
We are not in
Okay.
Boston at this moment.
We don't dwell. We don't dwell.
But we
in
don't
Boston.
dwell in Boston.
Yeah.
But we are within vicinity of.
We're in the gravity. Yeah, I see what
Right.
you're
So
saying. Yeah.
we are in Attleboro, Massachusetts at this point, which is not in Boston, unless you are traveling overseas and people ask you where you are from, and then you say Boston, because that's what the globe points at. However, yeah, for his people to dwell, that still hadn't happened yet. That still couldn't happen yet because the one sacrifice that was needed couldn't happen yet because none of us were pure.
So then, so God's desire to dwell with his people, which he says, I want to dwell with my people, is hindered by sin, which we know that's even obvious in the tabernacle. But it's also hindered by the character of God. Now, and that's not a slight on the character of God, but it's hindered on the character of God because he is holy and he is other. So it's not that. So God wants to dwell with his people, but he recognizes, and you see this again even in the design of the tabernacle, that for God, who's completely other, to dwell with his people, it would be it's an impossibility to be as accessible as the Greek idols.
So, yeah, actually, another thought just crossed my mind. Being on this side of the pandemic, there was a time not too long ago where we were all locked in our homes, and everyone was apprehensive to be near anyone else because we would infect each other.
Right.
So just God couldn't just at this point in history hang out with anybody. He is holy, right?
Yeah.
We will die. I mean, that's just the that is the expensive cost of our sin, right? Which is why there's that moment of I'll tuck you into the cleft of the rock, cover you with
Right.
my hand, and you'll see the tail end of my garment go by, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing to imagine. Like, what was that experience even
Right.
like?
Yeah.
I can't even wrap my head around that. To first of all, to be somewhere where God's going like this with his hand over
And
your
then
face.
as he's walking by, you're like, whoop.
Yeah, and then peekaboo as he goes
Yeah.
past, right? So holy smokes, that's got to be amazing.
Yeah.
But to have such a strong desire to be with everyone, because that's what we're designed for. And then to have the restriction of still can't touch. So that was as close as he could get.
That's good.
That's the boy in the bubble outfit, right?
Good. Oh, thank you for the Seinfeld quote. That's
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's a good episode when Seinfeld gets thrown in.
I wasn't thinking of Seinfeld, but sure.
That's the Bubble Boy Seinfeld episode.
Sure. Yeah, let's go with that.
Such a good episode. Okay, well, the other thing to that as well is, it's not only God can't dwell with his people because of the sin, but it's also that even at Mount Sinai, before the tabernacle gets unfolded, so to speak, the plan, God does overlay on the mountain. I didn't mention this, but it's helpful to think about it this way too, because God overlays on the mountain. Moses does go up, but the people are like,
they hear God talking.
They're like,
it's
nah,
terrifying.
like they want nothing to do with this. So it's not even. So it's almost like God can't dwell, but on the same end, God can't. The people don't want to. They're trying to. They almost force themselves to keep distant.
Right.
Which I don't blame them. Man, like even at the
Sounds
like 2 words. It's a movie title. No, it's not. When Jesus goes up with
the Transfiguration.
Transfiguration.
I've been to that place.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mount of.
And you overlook the Valley of Hamagiddo.
Oh, really?
Armageddon, as we translate it.
As it were, yeah.
Which is a huge open plain of, it's just fields and fields.
Really? Oh.
It is a massive space.
That'd be cool to see.
It's cool to see, and then when you get to the blood up to the horses' necks, that's a lot of blood. That's the first thing that goes through your mind. I mean, you get up there and you look out and you go, "Wow, look at how cool!" Oh, that's a lot.
That's a lot of blood.
But back to the tabernacle.
Yeah. Well,
speaking of blood,
but back to but just the transfiguration and the fact that Peter, so Jesus is transfigured before them. Moses and Elijah come down, and Peter doesn't know what to do himself. So he gets just this. It says that Jesus was transfigured and his clothing became whiter than the whitest white is kind of the idea. But Peter it knocks him out. He doesn't know what to do with it. So then imagine, that's not even God in all of his glory because you still have Christ as a human person. It's not only that God can't, and the pandemic illustration is good. It's just you can't, in fact, you just can't get close to it. But it's also like the people are like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Like I can't even, so there's all this separation that's just naturally created.
right?
And so I think, God addressing it in the way that he does, is so, even as we're talking, it reminds me of just how perfectly it's designed to meet as much of a need as is possible.
Yeah. That's really amazing. And then to know that it had to be transported around Like, that's a lot of stuff to carry around.
I was thinking about that. Like, how do you break everything down? And I mean, they talk about the poles for the ark. So the ark obviously has to be carried around. But like, do they roll the fabric up and then put it on carts or
Yeah,
what?
and
What's like?
who said the all clear because God was out of it?
Yeah, how do like who begins unlatching the like? Who's gonna be the first one to do that?
I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
Right? But again, and this is one of my favorite parts of all this story is the layers of stuff that are included in that wall, the fabric material
Yeah.
and the basically that veil. I love that it's called a veil. Holy moly, that's some veil. But yeah, but in any case, the fact that it includes the skin of dugongs just absolutely boggles my mind. I mean, acacia wood. Apparently,
Yeah.
yep, we can go find that. Right, that's okay. And then the other fabrics, sure, we can come up with that stuff. But then when you get to the skin of dugongs, you're in the wilderness. Who's got the dugong skins?
Who did anyone bring them from the Nile? I mean,
Where did you find them? I mean, where did you find some? When you went through the Red Sea, did somebody grab some on the way past?
like we might need this later. Like
We might need this.
You never know when you're going to need a dugong.
Check out these dugongs as we're walking through the Red Sea. grab one of these. I mean, how did they get dugong skins? Who's going around skinning dugongs ever
and keeping
at
them.
this point in history and then transporting them out into the middle of this place? How did that happen? The logistics of that make my head spin. That part absolutely fascinates me. But sorry, listeners, or listener. Sorry to you.
Oh, we are definitive listeners, plural.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
All three of you. Then
I am confident in the plurality of listeners. I'm not saying double digits. I'm just saying. I'm just saying more than one.
More than one.
We have more than one. Likely less than 10.
Wow. Awesome. Well, to
do you know that somehow sometimes there's things that get second life in them, like there's a show that comes out and it doesn't catch on right away, but then it becomes a cult classic afterwards, like Mystery Science Theater 3000 or
I
Firefly,
love that right away.
That also, yeah, but so maybe this will be like, hey, we had our our recording sessions and it had a life of its own, but then it'll get a second life and it'll be like the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I don't,
wow.
Yeah. That is a delusion of grandeur right there. That I did not have.
Especially considering the third one, but yeah.
I've not seen the third one.
You should not.
Oh, really?
I'm sure it's a great film. No.
I mean, I've seen the first two.
The first two had merit.
Okay. I just rewatched the first one, although that has nothing to do with Tabernacle. But we throw in everything. This is and also.
Right. Yeah, it
becomes about everything. All right. Well, let's for time's sake, let's the interesting thing about not only doing I could do months on the Tabernacle easily. It would not be hard to fill months. In fact, I actually tried to do this in one, and I got halfway through the structuring of the message, and I'm like, this is two at least. I know I'm going to keep it with two, but it's really there's too much to be able to really talk about. So not to say again, this podcast isn't about resolution. It's really about expanding comprehension. Like, how do we help understand what's going on? So as we move from the idea of design, because I will pick it up this week in the idea of design and the tabernacle, but the idea of design and the tabernacle is helping us to understand God, and then also the idea of the tabernacle and helping us to understand our relationship with God. How do we add to the comprehension of that as kind of a closing thought on the tabernacle, or closing couple thoughts?
Well, I think dwelling changed from physical to spiritual at Acts 2.
Yeah. Well, so actually, I just as you were talking, I was just rifling through the passages here, and it gets so to your point, it gets to oil for the lamp in 27, chapter 27, Exodus 27, verses 20 and 21. I won't read the whole thing, but it says you're to bring olive oil for the light, that a lamp may regularly be set up to burn. So we mentioned this before, that there's always light burning. There's always some light within the tabernacle. So you get to Acts 2, and you get the light burning again, the flames of fire that don't go out. But it shifts. It's no longer the structure. It's the people. So to hit the light to light, like God uses the same imagery throughout. It's really quite wonderful that He maintains this imagery. But He also changes it to Acts 2. So anyway, what are your thoughts on dwelling in Acts 2?
So now it's dwelling internally
Mm.
and empowering because, um, and it changes at that point because, like you mentioned at Sinai, the people are like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
that's way too much," and God finds a place to encapsulate, right? And on Acts 2, it's internal to each individual, but it goes out to everyone who can't wait to get the feel of it.
And who doesn't have to come to a tabernacle,
Right.
a specific place and space.
It's just dispersing from a place.
Well, that's actually we'll end with this because like the book of Hebrews. I actually when I went to Uruguay, I preached through the book of Hebrews, which I'm really thankful for because it gave me a lot of background on Hebrews that I hadn't had before. And what's been really interesting is as I've been doing Exodus, yeah, it crosses. It's this perfect mirror of like the writer of Hebrews saying like, hey, they did this way back when.
Yeah.
It didn't work out like they wanted it to, and but God was always preparing. He keeps referring to like shadows, and this idea of copies, because the tabernacle was always a shadow and a copy of what was going on in the heavenlies, and always a shadow and a copy of what God was going to do in Christ. And so he says, and I'll end with this because this is a perfect uh, kind of connection between Exodus and even Acts 2. In Hebrews 12, it says, Hebrews 12, starting in verse 18, "For you have not come to what may be touched, a blazing fire, and darkness and gloom, and a tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and a voice whose words made the hearers beg that no further messages be spoken to them," which is Mount Sinai. "For they could not endure the order that was given. Even if a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned. Indeed, so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I tremble with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to the innumerable angels in feastal gathering, and to the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the Spirit of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel." And then I'll skip a little bit. "Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. For thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." Just that concept of like, it used to be like this: if anyone even touches the mountain, they're gone.
Yeah.
Like they can't. And no one wanted to because they were freaking out. Even Moses, I was trembled with fear. Versus now, post Acts 2, it's this invitation to enter into the firstborn who enrolled in heaven, to God, the judge of all. You used to be afraid of the mountain, and now you're invited to the mountain.
Yeah.
Which same God, same holiness, same fire, same imagery, but through Christ it changes from this. You're right.
Yeah. Now we are allowed.
Right now we're yeah,
And not just allowed, welcomed as part of.
invited in, and so much so that the call is to in Israel, the Israelites were called to invite other nations in. There's always room for the refugee, for the alien, everyone to come in, but it was part of their identity to be a blessing to the nations. I'll make you a blessing to be a blessing, but it wasn't commanded until well, until Matthew 28, which connects with Acts 2. So now it's commanded not only that we live at the mountain, Mount Zion, not Mount Sinai, but that we invite other people to experience God in that way, right? So it's this, it's much more invitational, welcoming to the same God, same holiness, same love, but He's provided a solution that we can actually dwell with Him in through it, because the sacrifice had to be perfect. So, all right, well, anything else on the tabernacle that needs to be said?
Yes.
On that note, we we have covered. Well, actually, the only thing that comes to mind is dugong skins. We've covered that, and the Book of Acts, and Hebrews, and the wilderness. We went all the way to Genesis, the garden. We've been all over the scriptures today.
But where does the tabernacle end?
Well, New Jerusalem.
No. At the temple.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
So, with David.
Right, yeah.
And it fascinates me that it took until there, right? Until this push to make a monument. Again, this is a human monument to God to symbolize. And God refuses it at first. And that's interesting. But yeah, this is the start point. God asks to dwell among us. And it ends when man says, I'm making you a house. And God says, no. But you're living in a tent, Grandpa. Come on. Move in.
Wouldn't you like a house more?
Wouldn't you like a house? Be in the house. No.
What it shows, too, the history, even starting at the garden and ending at Jesus, both of God's solutions, God, or the garden and Jesus. And He does give us the tabernacle as a means, but it just reminds you of how much we love to complicate things.
Yes.
Like that's what it comes. God is like, okay, here, I'll give you this simple, right? Not a problem. No, we need to complicate it. Then there's, oh no, we need to complicate it. It's like we 2,000 years after Jesus' death and resurrection, we love to complicate it. And God's like,
what we do,
right?
Human beings.
Yeah, we're like if we can make it bureaucratic and red tapey and hard, if we can make it harder to do, we will make it harder to do.
Now it feels authentic.
All the while, God's like, well, I didn't.
That's not what I said.
That's not what I said. Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, thanks for discussion on the tabernacle, and I'll see you next time.
Well, thank you very much. And farewell to our listener.
Zzz.